So here's a little bit of physiology for you. Physiology in a nutshell. Why do we breathe? Well, all breath happens to take oxygen to the mitochondria to produce ATP. That is what breathing is about. Breathing has many, many more consequences than that because of the way we've evolved. So breathing affects fluid flow in the body. It affects digestion. It affects peristalsis. It affects venous return, that's blood flow back to the heart. It affects cerebrospinal fluid flow. It affects everything. Breathing affects heartbeat rate. Breathing affects the electromagnetic web of the body. But, and also, breathing happens primarily to get oxygen into those mitochondria at the right amount, which is actually not very much. It's somewhere between 1 and 2%, right? It's a tiny amount, and that's at a cellular level. It's probably even less in the mitochondria, down to about 0.05% or so. Gets the right amount of oxygen in the mitochondria to carry the hydrogen ions away. The hydrogen ions are the result of splitting up the bonds, mostly in sugars, between carbon and hydrogen. Sugar is C6H12O6. That's 6 carbons, 12 hydrogens and 6 oxygens, C6H12O6. And that's split into 2 pyruvates, and those are then fed into the machinery, which produces at the end of it ATP from a mechanism called the proton pump. We're not going into that on this course. That's next level stuff. But it's just to understand that why we breathe is to get that oxygen into the mitochondria. But of course, the breathing process itself then has many, many, many other side effects through the system, all of which we're looking at on this course. And those effects are all the way to, the mechanics of the body and how the body works through to psychology. Now, the other key byproduct of the mitochondrial process, other than ATP, well, there are 2. One's water. We make water on the inside. But the other key one really is carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide is absolutely crucial because carbon dioxide has a whole range of functions. And a lot of breathwork stuff we're talking about is looking at how carbon dioxide affects the body and the mind. Now, if there's insufficient carbon dioxide, hemoglobin can't let go of its oxygen. We're going to talk about that in a minute. Right? But carbon dioxide is how the brainstem knows when to inhale. And that's because the carbon dioxide breaks down into 2 ions, that's charged particles in the blood through the hemoglobin. It breaks down into a bicarbonate ion and a hydrogen ion. The bicarbonate is alkaline, the hydrogen is acidic. So those 2 things are buffering the blood, enabling the blood to regulate at a steady level. And it's the hydrogen ions that are being measured in the brainstem. And when there's an increase in those, a little flow of increase, and it's constantly fluxing, constantly changing, then the brainstem initiates an inhale. And it does this on a rhythmical basis through the Prebot-Singer complex. So carbon dioxide is crucial in terms of your body knowing when to breathe in. It's crucial in terms of regulating blood acidity. And one of the consequences of this, and we talked about hemoglobin, is that hemoglobin, which is the red pigment in blood cells, that responds to those hydrogen ions. So it opens to receive oxygen in the lungs, and then it closes to carry that around the blood, and only opens to release the oxygen when there is sufficient hydrogen ions there, when there's sufficient carbon dioxide there. That acidity allows the hemoglobin to open up and release its oxygen. It's quite amazing, these structural changes to the hemoglobin in the presence of hydrogen ions. But it's that allows the oxygen to get into your cells. When there's not enough carbon dioxide, we have a name for that. It's called hypocapnia. Hypo means less. So it's less, capnia is carbon dioxide. There's less carbon dioxide. So hypocapnia is very simply where there's insufficient carbon dioxide to allow the oxygen to effectively release. The outcome of that is oxygen can't go from the hemoglobin into the cells. Right? And that state of less than required amounts of oxygen has got 2 names. One's hypoxia, the other's hypoxemia. But we'll use the term hypoxia. So hypoxia is where there's insufficient oxygen in the cells to do what needs to be done. And that has consequences. It means there are all sorts of symptoms in the body that can occur, from fatigue, tingling, numbness, incapacity to focus, incapacity to problem solve, you can't make decisions, there are anxiety, there are all sorts of consequences, and we go through a list of these. But that lack of oxygen, again, produces less ATP. There's less energy. Massive consequences to hypercapnia. We certainly don't want hypercapnia as an entrained practice where that becomes chronic. Acute hypercapnia, people feel dizzy, people sometimes faint, people get scared and anxious. It's like a panic attack. How do we deal with that? Well, down-regulate, of course, hold the breath out, increase the carbon dioxide. Very simple. Breathe into a paper bag sometimes, but that, of course, is a way of increasing the carbon dioxide. So carbon dioxide is really important. It's really important to understand that that's one of the byproducts of the mitochondrial process. So you can see how the carbon dioxide actually helps feed the mitochondria with the right amount of oxygen as well. Look, it's amazing. Biology is amazing, isn't it? Now, of course, it's possible to have too much carbon dioxide, and that's called hypercapnia. But hypercapnia is quite rare, and mostly in that context, you're talking about some very serious medical problem. So if somebody's got hypercapnia, they're probably going to be in medical care. It does have pretty nasty consequences, but they're unlikely to be coming to you as a breath worker. And what we're paying attention to here is hypocapnia, reduced carbon dioxide, and certainly chronic practices where somebody may have learned some breathing pattern from something online or from a yoga teacher or somewhere that's supposed to do certain things, but it actually ends up with them being hypercapnic. We can look into that. How do you know if somebody's hypercapnic? Well, you can get a capnometer and measure it. I have pieces of kit I can do that with. Other than that, we've got the 4 breath tests, and you've got those under your belt. You know what those are, and those are not diagnostic. They are indicative of looking at whether there's hypercapnia or not. So what is the optimal level of carbon dioxide? Well, gases in the blood are measured in what's called partial pressure, which is a way of measuring how the gas is working in solution. It's also measured in air in the same way. But partial pressure of carbon dioxide in the arteries, that's in the main blood vessels that pump from the heart, or oxygenated vessels, should be around 35 to 45 millimeters of mercury, and that's how it's measured in millimeters of mercury and pressure. But that 35 to 45 band is the optimal or eucapnic level, and that's the term eucapnia. Anything lower than 35, we're getting into hypocapnia, and that means we're going to have that reduced oxygen. Higher than 45 is hypercapnia, which of course sometimes happens when people are doing things like free diving. But if it's happening on a chronic basis in somebody's life, like we said, it's a medical problem. Let's list some of the effects of hypercapnia. Well, fatigue is one. Not enough oxygen, going to give you fatigue. Stress headaches, muscle weakness, foggy thinking, fuzzy brain. Learning deficit, can't learn very well. Poor memory. Dissociation, like you're not in your body. Hallucinations even. Increase in brain excitability, brain noise. Diminished coordination, you stumble and stuff. Numbness, tingling, nausea, you're feeling sick. Tetany, where the muscles contract and get tight. Heart membrane instability. That's hypoxic problems. Gut problems. Sensory deficit, plus. There are so many problems associated with it. Now, we've talked about acute, the panic attack type, hypercapnia, and chronic hypercapnia, which is entrained. And we really have to think about this. And another problem that comes, of course, when the blood becomes alkali from hypercapnia, so the kidneys have to excrete bicarbonate. And this means that if we exercise anaerobically and produce lactic acid, we acidify the blood even more, and there's less buffer. So to counteract this, we increase the breath weight, blow out more carbon dioxide, get into this horribly destructive cycle. So, it is a problem. Hypercapnia is a big problem in terms of kidney function. It's a big problem in terms of everything in the body. So we need to be working with this. Another longer term effect of hypoxia is the production of cancer. Yep. We know nowadays that the distribution of HIF-A in the cells, when there's less oxygen, it's allowed to meet with HIF-B in the nucleus, which then causes epigenetic changes to gene expression, which appears to alter the Krebs cycle, shifts cells into growth rather than ATP production, and can be one of the main causes in the production of cancer. So we really have to look at anybody running with some kind of chronic hypercapnic condition, it can have devastating effects. So we want to be looking at these. So that's kind of your, physiology of breathing. We talked about mitochondria, oxygen, hemoglobin, hypercapnia, hypercapnia, and the consequences of that, just in a nutshell, for you to go through and just get some of that into your brain, all right? So physiology in a nutshell for you.